Hello, and welcome to A Better World with Julann and Fran. My co-host Julann can't be joining us this week because she's on a vacation, wonderful vacation. But I am Fran, and today we're speaking with Jay. Well, today I'm speaking with Jay Rosenthal. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Fran. I'm so glad to be here.
And I'm so
Um,
glad to have you.
Thank you.
And would you talk a little bit about something you're doing or have done that makes the world a better place?
So, there are so many things that can be done to make the world a better place, big and small. And I've always been a bigger thinker, for better or for worse. And for me, making the world a better place has often been more entrepreneurial. It's been more business, and in particular, big business, gets such a bad rap. Sometimes justified, but overall, I think a bad rap. Because at the heart of business, especially in a very capitalistic society, is the idea of solving problems. Now, not every solution is a great solution. Um, they obviously don't make refrigerators like they used to. Now they break a lot quicker. The repair expenses, the maintenance expenses. Some refrigerators apparently now have subscriptions.
Mm.
But there are certainly ways to make the world a better place by solving problems. And in college, originally, I majored in psychology. And after my bachelor's, I really didn't go back to school. I was not the kind of person who did well in a structured curriculum. And I spent about 8 years in various roles in social services because what did I want to do? I wanted to help, I wanted to understand people. And I played various roles working with kids, adults, families across the lifespan. And eventually I got sick and tired of it because unfortunately, a lot of, especially government and government contracted social services, which consists of the majority of it, is very bureaucratic and very ineffective at what they intend to do. And it's very hard to work and do, in particular, good work in an environment like that. So eventually, what I did do was set up a consulting firm in consulting in family justice, child welfare, divorce, child custody, etc. And that was really my passion for a long time. But one of the problems is that a lot of people don't realize how much trouble they're in until it already happens. And unfortunately, we've gone from a relatively high trust society to a very low trust society. And there are consequences to that. You see this in payment processing, like in friendly fraud, where, oh, I regret this, let me do a chargeback, let me dispute the charge. And it's very hard to fight. Or you see it in, especially in urban areas, a lot of people, they don't know their neighbors. Borrowing sugar from a neighbor is almost seen like a burden or an inconvenience. You see this in when I was a kid, my mother would take me to the pediatrician. Now you see that copay being paid before, not after, like she used to do it. It was usually at the end of the session because there was trust that if the service was provided, that it would be paid for. We've lost a lot of that trust, and it's made it very hard to develop relationships. And eventually, due to AI and cost issues, that consulting business did decline. And I did close it at the beginning of this year. I did start the act of shutting it down. And the truth is, that was hard because I've seen how easy it is for a parent to lose their children. I've seen how subjective and brutal family justice can be. No question about it. And at the same time, I ended up working on myself. When you're going through very hard times, it is a very humbling time. I started seeing a hypnotherapist, and I got really lucky. She was absolutely phenomenal, and she helped get me out of my head in a huge way and really be present in the world. And I became fascinated with the actual phenomenon, what was going on. And I am very much a curious person. And unfortunately, I had neither the time nor the money to hold my hypnotherapist hostage for 10 to 15 hours a week to ask all my incessant questions, 75% of which probably nobody on the planet could answer anyway. But my curiosity was piqued, so I did the next best thing. I found a school where the instructor's job was solely to do just that, answer all my incessant questions, and enrolled promptly. And promptly after that, I was reminded of exactly why I don't do particularly well in school. I learn quickly. I get bored very quickly with the curriculum, and I tend to stress test the curriculum very quickly. Um, Instructors don't tend to like that. But to get to your point, I've tried different ways of helping people. And I've experienced good therapy and bad therapy, psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, even coaching and mentorship. And it's given me a lot of great opportunity to understand what good therapy looks like and what bad therapy looks like. And we've seen changes in training. We've seen the managed care model and the medical model particularly take over training in grad school for psychotherapy, for clinical psychology, social work, counseling, etc. Hypnotherapy is a bit of a different animal, more of a vocational setup. But at the same time, we saw that a lot of the depth approaches, a lot of the human approaches disappeared for the most part, or were given lip service. Diagnosis was relied on a lot more. And it really seemed that there was much more of a push toward medication and very abbreviated approaches to therapy. And in particular, it frustrated me to see that. I think there's also, whether you're a coach, whether you're a hypnotherapist, whether you're a psychotherapist, hypnosis is relatively easy to teach. You can teach almost anyone how to hypnotize someone. The therapy part of hypnotherapy is the hard part to really learn. And I do believe that there are limitations on that learning. This may be somewhat of a hot take, but it used to be that in graduate psychotherapy programs, that if a particular student was showing temperament or personality that would, while in the program, that made them not necessarily a good fit to enter the field, they would be discharged from the program. You don't really see that anymore. And we don't really screen for that kind of fit in training. And hypnotherapy is not really regulated in the same way. So there are real issues. You have some that come into the profession that really are not a good fit for actually providing therapy, and you have some that are phenomenal, but it is very hard to tell in advance, especially because even if someone is a great practitioner, they're not necessarily a good fit for you. But hypnotherapy in particular nowadays is a real opportunity because without a lot of the regulations and a lot of the red tape, it is certainly more accessible. And if you go back to the earliest stages of development of modern psychotherapy. You go all the way back to Freud. Freud was an awful hypnotist, and psychoanalysis, as Freud initially conceived of it, actually grew out of the idea of, is it possible to reach the same ends as hypnosis and hypnotherapy do without trance? The answer is yes. It can take a lot more time, but the answer is yes. And that is essentially, that was the inspiration behind psychoanalysis. And because hypnotherapy and hypnosis were dismissed from mainstream psychology for so long, until Erickson came along and started to kind of give it legitimacy, psychology has struggled to kind of take it back within its licensed ranks. And that offers a real opportunity for a lot of people who don't really like the managed care model, who want to be able to have an experience that is tailored to what you want to work on, rather than what's wrong with you. We see a lot nowadays this idea that almost any uncomfortable human emotion is pathologized. It's labeled with a diagnosis, and the DSM-1 came out because psychiatry was a little insecure about the fact that they didn't have their own diagnostic taxonomy. But there's a big question as to whether psychotherapy is actually a science or it's an art. And while there is certainly a neurological component to behavior, you could label that behavioral neurology, I do have real questions as to whether psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, and even coaching are really that much of a science. And so in hypnotherapy, I saw an opportunity to bring back the idea that within the spectrum of normal human emotion, there's nothing wrong with seeking help. There's nothing wrong with actually exploring what's going on, taking the time to understand, and achieving meaningful change. And hypnosis has an enormous amount of evidence backing it up in a wide range of areas. It's one of those things that it seems to defy conventional wisdom, but it works. And it's hard to understand that without actually going through it, especially with the Hollywood stereotypes that really do it a disservice. And what I do, going into hypnotherapy, I've tried to bring back that old style model. My sessions, most of them, are 90 minutes long. I spend 45 minutes each of these sessions just talking with my clients. And the rest of it I spend doing hypnosis. So much of what actually makes hypnotherapy or coaching or psychotherapy work is the therapeutic relationship. And the hypnotherapeutic relationship is just as important as the therapeutic alliance in psychotherapy, or what they call the coaching alliance in coaching. That and the client's expectation. And in a time when we are so lonely, so isolated, and I blame a lot of social media, post-COVID, a lot of the third spaces that we had disappeared, and it put us a lot more online. I don't think that's been particularly helpful in developing social skills, in developing friendships, which really require repeated exposure. And on top of that, I'm starting to I actually had a conversation with a colleague the other day. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in hypnotherapy for strong ethical group practice. And I did have a conversation with a colleague of mine who I think has the right temperament and the right personality to be a great hypnotherapist. I am starting to prepare by the end of the year to start taking on contractors contracted hypnotherapists across the country. Um, Business is very hard to do. Getting the marketing right, getting the sales right, getting the operations right, regulatory compliance. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for great hypnotherapists to help people who struggle with the visibility, who struggle with the regulatory compliance. And we need more of that. We need more of allowing for improvement without pathologizing, without needing the prior approval of insurance. We need something that has evidence that shows that it works, and we need talented practitioners. And I see this lacking in so many areas. And on top of that, hypnosis has so much, there's so much to be desired in training. One of the things I found, I didn't learn most of the way I practice hypnotherapy. I really didn't learn in my formal training. I found that it gives the basics on how to hypnotize somebody. And the Cappuccinian approach, while it's effective, is very reflective of John Kappas. It is very showy. He started out as a stage hypnotist who kind of adapted what he did for hypnotherapy when stage hypnosis unfortunately didn't work out for him. And he did some great things, and there are plenty of Cappuccinian hypnotherapists who do very well. But it's still a very primitive area. And a lot of good content is paywalled behind trainings that cost hundreds to thousands of dollars. And yes, a lot of the voluntary certification bodies do require that continuing education. Sure. But I think that there's a real... the therapy part of hypnotherapy in particular, combined with hypnosis, I think there's a lot of content that's accessible, but not the content that gets people to where they want to be. It's very easy to learn to hypnotize somebody, and that content is very prevalent. But actually making something stick, actually helping somebody get better, is at a totally different level. And so I started a Substack at the beginning of July, and I publish once a week. I call it the hypnotherapist's internal monologue, because that's really what it is for me. I'm writing my own thoughts, and out of that come a combination of novel techniques, ethics, and even an exploration of what hypnosis is. And one thing I've committed to doing is actually keeping that free, because I think it's so important to really understand hypnosis and hypnotherapy at depth. And I think there's really the way that, because psychotherapy in particular, and even coaching, it becomes so commoditized, I think that we've run into a real problem in our understanding of what helping someone looks like. We use a lot of therapy speak nowadays. Discomfort, I can't tell you how many times I hear someone tell me, oh, my ex was a narcissist, and he or she really was a narcissist, and this is why. Usually, if you're really under the control of a narcissist, or my boyfriend is a narcissist, my girlfriend is a narcissist, you're not posting about it. You're not talking about it. And we've taken so many of these medicalized words and we've stripped them of meaning, because when you take the objectivity away from them, a shared understanding, and they can apply to anything, then they mean nothing, because there's no shared language there. In fact, I find that that's one of my struggles with hypnosis and hypnotherapy in particular. I describe what I do, even where it is different. There's always the question of, well, I think I do that too, because we don't even agree on what hypnosis is at this point. You ask people what hypnosis is, even practitioners who've been practicing for 20, 30 years. If you ask 20 of them, you'll get 20 different answers. It's but at the end of the day, I think we need to bring the when the new age developments are causing some of the problems, we need to look back and find out what worked and start there again. Usually, you look at uh, usually if you look back 250 years, you can see society running full circle. I think in psychotherapy and hypnotherapy, and generally, if you look at tech and you look at a lot of these other areas, we're starting to look backward because we see that the pendulum has swung too far one way or the other. I think we have a real opportunity, and that's the change I'm starting to see. You're seeing that in certain trends in Gen Z, like disconnecting from their phones, trying to look to get offline a little bit more. Uh, Even when you go into when you go into the city to various stores, you tend to hear music from the '90s, the older music rather than more modern music, and even the younger generations are taking to that. I think we're seeing some of the excesses. While there is certainly good in the current time, I think that there is a theme that we're starting to examine the excesses again, where we've gone too far, where the pendulum has swung too far. And we need more entrepreneurs, more business people, more members of our communities to embrace that mindset a little more. And hopefully that can help us trust each other a little bit more.
Mm. That would be great if we could trust each other more. And you're certainly right. I mean, I think people are more on edge now in terms of trust than they were in the past, and it's earned. You mentioned Kappa-Cinean hypnosis. In case our listeners aren't aware of what that is, can you give a description of that?
So, Kappa-Cinean hypnosis is a particular approach to hypnosis. Uh, to it's often taught in training because it is one of the easier approaches to learn. Um, it is very structured, um, very uh, it's there's a lot of very physical involvement of what are called ideomotor responses. If you've ever seen someone's arm go rigid or potentially raise, uh, there's a lot more of that, which helps us understand a little more that what hypnosis is or what hypnosis feels like. Um, it also really functions on it relies very heavily on styles of suggestibility, what they call emotional and physical. Uh, it's more of a linguistic preference heuristic, at least in terms of how I've come to see it, than it is a suggestibility scale. But it is still useful, and it looks at does someone respond more to, for example, direct language, like um, you will feel happy, or you feel happy, or something more inferred. Um, Perhaps you feel lighter, more energetic, and inspired. And they're really the same suggestion, but just delivered two different ways. And some clients are more likely to respond uh, to more direct language, and some are more likely to respond to more inferred language. Uh, and so the Kappa-Cinean approach tends to simplify and simplify hypnosis into a particular workflow that makes it very easy to practice, very easy to understand, on a wider level. A lot of people, most practitioners in my experience, will mix different approaches. But the Kaplan-Meierian approach is certainly a very simple and easy approach. Doesn't mean simple and easy does not mean ineffective. Let me be clear about that. While it is not my favorite style to use, it is certainly a valuable contribution, and there are some clients who certainly respond better to that kind of approach. No question about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a very important discovery on Dr. Kappas's part because there was a book published by, I think the author is John Gray, called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It was several decades ago that it was published.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the world took that on and began to believe that the difference is between two genders. And of course, now we're discovering that there are more than two genders. So that it was just a very limiting book in that regard. But I remember I was in couples therapy with somebody I was dating at the time, and the therapist suggested I read that book, that we both read that book. And we did. And what I learned from that book was that I was the man in every relationship I'd been in, you know, because the way that they describe the things that men do are the things that I do. And so I just thought, well, that can't be right. So when I learned about the difference between inferential people and literal people, and that's the better way to phrase your suggestions to them, I thought that was a really important thing to discover.
So, I can see that in some capacity. I'm less likely to put people into boxes like that. When you look at the bell curve of the differences between men and women, most of them intersect because the differences are really at the tail ends of the bell curve. The differences are at the extremes between men and women. So, the area that the psychological research actually shows where men and women are most different is men are interested in things stereotypically, and women are more interested in people. Obviously, I'm in a field where the interest is more in people, and it is certainly there are more women than men there. It's not that there aren't any men in the field, in the helping professions, for example. It's that those that are most intensely interested in things are almost all men. And those that are most interested in people are almost all women statistically if we look at the psychological data. So but you could say that you could take any particular trait. You could take intelligence. You could take you could take linguistic preference. You could take physical strength, and you could see that same pattern. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some women that are stronger than men, because the majority of people fall toward the middle of the bell curve.
Right. So, right. So you are a hypnotherapist then, or are you not? Did
Yes.
you did pursue that? Okay, good. So do you find that as a hypnotherapist you attract a particular type of client?
It's interesting. I do, and it's less about a particular problem, and it seems to be more personality. The type of client I seem to bring in is they're very, I don't want to say gifted, but they are typically, some of them are, but they're typically at least somewhat successful. They're typically very emotionally aware. They're very self-aware, and they're highly motivated to change. Um, Part of that is I tend to really take a more of a depth approach to hypnotherapy, and I find that a good amount of my clients have actually tried hypnotherapy or hypnosis before, and they said, the hypnotherapist really didn't seem to have an impact. Maybe they were a little less experienced, or maybe their style just didn't resonate. And they come to me, and one of the things that I end up doing differently is I see hypnosis as more of an immersive, imaginative experience. And so the imagery that I use, different from, I know you went to HMI, very different from what Cheryl O'Neill does. Uh, I tend to treat it more like a guided first person experience from induction all the way through. And so the change comes, there are some traditional suggestions that are given, but the imagery, the experience, is the load bearing component, is the load bearing element. So the client actually has an imaginative experience, which kind of very often results in a corrective emotional experience, and the suggestions beyond that are more of a reinforcing mechanism. And my clients seem to very often really like that journey. It doesn't mean that approaches like Michael Yapko's, which is much more of, I'm going to tell the story and I'm going to give you suggestions as to why it's relevant. Because I was just reading his book, Process Oriented Hypnosis, and in the examples that he gives in how his hypnosis sessions go, that's a theme that I acknowledged. So some clients may do better with me, some clients may do better with an approach like his. It's really important to kind of get that right.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Different people are going to respond to different techniques in different ways. And it is absolutely essential that a person realize that it's not, the problem is not that hypnosis doesn't work. It's that you have not yet found the perfect person and technique for you.
Exactly. I will say my mentor, um, and I still see him for case consultations. A wonderful guy. I had him as a professor when I was in undergrad at Adelphi, and he's still an adjunct there. He's been a clinical psychologist and hypnotherapist for over 50 years. And I remember when I was in training, one of the things that he said to me was, he was explaining his own approach, and he tended to use a particular, he'd start out with a breathing exercise for induction, and he used the same deepener. And I tend to offer a lot more variety and customize things depend on the fly, depending on how on what my client's goal is, what their personality is, their preferences are, their needs. Um, and he emphasized that most of the work is a combination of the client's expectation and the therapeutic relationship. And I started looking at hypnosis differently. Not that the techniques aren't important, but even the research pans out on this, is that the relationship, expectation, and the client's own life circumstances uh, will take are most of what factors into outcome. It doesn't mean that the techniques aren't valuable, but I started focusing more on not just developing rapport, but the whole therapeutic alliance, um, and that expectation. I think that is so important, and I focus a lot less on the testing and the psychoeducation. I do still, I still do psychoeducation, just not quite as much. I do it where it's needed, um, and at the end of the day, that has been so important. It was just so hard because I put so much work into the techniques, and I still do. I still put a lot of work into technique. But when I say that it's very easy to learn to hypnotize someone and very hard to learn, it's much harder to learn the therapy part, this is exactly what I mean.
Okay. Um, when somebody wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
So they can certainly they can visit my practice's website, heartworkhypnosis.com. They
Okay.
can they can give us a call toll free. My intake specialist can certainly tell you how to get connected with me at 866-494-9766. Or if you're interested in working with me, you can certainly schedule a free consultation right on our website. Just go to heartworkhypnosis.com, click free consultation in the menu, and pick a time, pick a day, and we'll see if I'm a good fit for you and you're a good fit for me.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. And I love the name of your business, Heartwork. That's great.
Thank
Heartwork
you.
hypnosis. Yeah, that's really nice. All right. Well, thank you so much for being the guest today. And thank you for sharing your vast knowledge on several different subjects. And I appreciate and I'm glad that you did this. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Fran.
All right. This has been another episode of A Better World with Julann and Fran and our guest, Jay Rosenthal. And please like and share this video. And please join us again next week, won't you? So long for now.